Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of the Barefoot Genealogist. Today's topic is public versus private online family trees. Now for the last couple of days, and actually the last couple of months, every time I talk to anybody, I always ask them whether their tree is public or private and why. And I've gotten so many opinions about this. We've seen opinions on our Facebook page since we posted the announcement that we were going to be doing this as the topic today. And it seems like that people are really passionate about this. They have really strong opinions about it, one way or the other. And I'm trying really hard not to share my opinion, just to give you enough information that you can make a decision about what's best for you. You may get a little bit of color from my opinion today, but I'll try to keep that out and just share with you as much information as possible so that you can make an educated decision about why you might want to put your tree online if you haven't already, and then what settings to use, whether public or private, to manage your tree. So with that much of an introduction, let's dive in. The first thing that I just want to share with you is what your options are for public versus private. And you're going to see this not just when you have a tree online, but you're going to see this for others' trees as well. And this will help you understand what you're seeing. So the first option you have is to have a public tree, which means anybody that goes out and searches is going to be able to find your tree. Now, one of the concerns that people have is, well, what about living people? Living people in your tree are not shown. They're listed as private. And any media, so pictures and images and stories, any media attached to those living people also is not shown, okay? Here's how we determine if the person is living. If their birth date is within the last 100 years and there's nothing in the death date field, that is automatically marked private. Okay, what that means is if you have living people in your tree, you need to have a birth date on them. Some people choose not to put in the birth date thinking they're going to share too much information, but if there is no birth date, all we're looking at is that one person. We're not taking the time and the processing power to compare with their parents or their grandparents to make that decision. So if their birth date was in the last 100 years, there's nothing in the death date field, it's automatically marked private. If the person was born within the last 100 years and you don't know their death date, you can manually mark them as deceased so that their information shows up. So let me just show you, first of all, what a public tree is going to look like when you search it, and then also where you can manage those privacy settings for living people. So here I just did a simple search for my grandfather, and these are the public member tree results that show up. Okay, so we see all these different trees and you can see all his information. Now, of course, he's deceased. So I'm going to look here at my cousin Margie. She's got a tree online and we haven't collaborated at all yet. But you'll notice over here where it lists his spouse and his children, all of them just say private. And that's because my grandmother and my dad and his siblings are all still living. And so they don't show up in her tree when somebody else is viewing it. It just says private. That's all it says. I can click on it. It'll just take me to a page that says private. Okay? So that's as much information as I'm going to get about that particular living person. Okay? Now, if I was viewing my own tree, so this is that same person, that same private person, my grandmother, in my tree, you'll see right here where it says living. Okay, and you can click on that if you forget the information we've shared with you, and it'll explain to you exactly how this works. But you'll see I also have the option here to mark this person as deceased. So for example, if my grandmother had passed away, this is a bad example. If my grandmother had passed away and I didn't know the death date or I hadn't entered it yet, I could just mark her deceased and check save, and that means she would show up when other people did searches for my tree. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so public trees, you can make all of your tree public. Living people show up as private, and others cannot see their information or any media attached to them. The next option you have is private. Okay, so it's either public or private, and in order to view other people's trees that have been marked private, you're going to have to contact the member or the user that owns that tree and be invited to that tree in order to view any information. So here's, again, what that looks like in search results. I did that same search for my grandfather, and now I'm looking at private member trees, and you'll notice the only thing that shows up, even though there's probably a lot more information about him in this tree, it shows his name, his birth year, not even the full date, and his birthplace. Okay? So I don't see his death information or his spouse or his parents. I don't see any of that. I can tell if this person has records attached or not. And then I can click on this, and what it'll do is it'll take me to this page, and this is a good example. This is a silly example, because this is actually another one of my usernames. But you can then click on that, and you can contact that person for more information. Okay, I always click on this button because what it does is it tells me when they last logged in. If their last login was over 6 months ago, chances are they're not really active on Ancestry.com. And so the chances of you getting a response are going to be very low. You just need to be aware of that. You still can't hurt to contact them, but you just need to know. Also, whenever you contact these users, we do not share your email address with them or vice versa. Unless that's how you've set up your email settings. So it's a privately brokered conversation. The emails are going to show up here, this little envelope with the number. You can see I've got 13 messages. I swear I clean these out all the time. But that's good. It means that people are contacting me wanting more information on some of the people in my trees that I have chosen to keep private. Okay, so that's how private search results show up. Okay. Now you do have a third option, and it's a little bit more restrictive. Basically what it is it's called private unindexed. What that means is you can put your tree online for backup purposes, you can put your tree online so that you can work on it, whatever. But if you mark it private unindexed, nobody will ever find anyone in your tree, right? Nobody will ever connect with you. Nobody in your tree will ever show up in search results, okay? Now, here is where you manage those settings. So if I am in my own tree, so here's my tree. If I just come up here to where it says tree pages, and I have this tree settings link. I'm going to click on that, and you'll see here I have a tab for privacy settings. And now you can see your tree can either be public. If I scroll down a little bit here, it can be private. And if I check this little box right here, now it is private unindexed, which just means nobody's going to be able to find it if they were to do a search. And then you'll just click Save Changes, and that saves those changes. Now, if your tree has been public and you are moving it to private, there's a couple of things you need to be aware of. The first one is that it takes a few days at least, okay, to roll some of those changes through our system. The second thing is if anybody has already copied information from your tree, when your tree was public, that information will still be out there on their trees, right? You're only making your tree private, not all the information you've ever provided to anybody else's tree. I hope that makes sense. And if you go the other way, if you move your tree from private to public, I probably should have looked into this. Again, it takes a little while for that change to roll live. Okay. Now, of course, you're not going to be able to really tell unless you have somebody else log into their account and ask them to do a search when that occurs. Because for you, your tree always looks the same. Okay. But it does take a little while for those changes to roll to live. Okay. Next thing I just want to talk about is sharing. So if your tree, whether your tree is public or private, you have the opportunity to share things with other people. Now, if your tree is public, basically everybody in the Ancestry.com universe is a guest by default, right? So you don't have to actually share your tree specifically with people that are already on Ancestry.com because they already can see your tree and they can already leave comments on your tree, okay? So if your tree is private, if you want anybody to be able to view your tree, you do have to share it with them. And there's 3 levels of sharing that you can invite people to participate in. The first one is they can be a guest. That means they can view your tree and they can leave comments. The second level of sharing is contributor. That means they can view your tree, they can leave comments, and they can add stories and photos. So if you have like a second cousin and they have photos of your great-grandparents, you can invite them to be a contributor on your tree, and they can upload those photos. If they have memories of some of those people, they can actually add stories to those people on your tree. Okay, they can contribute to what already exists on your tree. And then the third level of sharing is an editor. So an editor can do all the things that a guest and contributor can do, but an editor can also add or edit people, right? So you want to make sure it's someone that you trust if you're going to give them edit capabilities, and they can see living people. So these guests and contributors, again, all they're going to see on those living people is just private. But an editor, then that gives them the ability to see living people on your tree. Basically, an editor has all rights that an owner has except tree deletion capability. So an editor can't delete your tree. They can delete individuals in your tree, but they can't delete your entire tree. Only the tree owner can do that. But the editor then has all other rights that the tree owner has. So those are the different levels of sharing if you've chosen to make your tree private. You're going to find that again in the same spot that you found these privacy settings. You just hover over this tree pages link. There's a tree settings link. When you get there, there's a little tab for sharing. And when I click on that, it gives me the opportunity to invite people. Now, you can invite people using their Ancestry.com username if they're an Ancestry user. But the cool thing about tree sharing is they don't have to have an Ancestry.com account if you want them to be part of your tree, if you want them if you want to share your tree with them. You can invite them by email. And there's any number of email options here. So I could just plug in, for example, I could plug in my sister's email account. She does not have an Ancestry.com subscription. She doesn't need to. And I could then invite her. And then here where it says role is where you're going to set the level of permission for that specific person. You can even note who exactly in your tree that person is. So if it's somebody already in your tree, you can say it's this person, provide their email, set up their role, include a personal message so that they know it's not spam, and then send out that invitation. That's a really great way to collaborate with people. I use this on occasion when family members ask me for information rather than printing something out or trying to get them a report or whatever. I'll just share my tree with them. Now, there are some times where somebody's not certain if they're related to me. I'll still share my tree with them on occasion, and then I'll just set a reminder for myself in my calendar that I'm only going to give them access for a couple of weeks. And I let them know that in this message. And the reason I do that is because I find if I give them a deadline, they're more likely to actually do something. They're more likely, if they feel like they're under a deadline, to go in and look at the tree and add whatever information that they're going to add or copy whatever information they're going to copy. So that's how I manage that particular feature of sharing. Now, here comes the touchy, opinionated part of today's presentation, which is which one do you do, public or private, right? So I've polled lots of people, and I have come up with a lot of reasons why you might want a public tree, and a few reasons why you might want a private tree. Surprisingly, rather than more positive reasons why you might want a private tree, there were actually negative reasons why you might want a public tree. And I don't agree with all of them, but I'll try to keep this as positive as possible. So, first, when you have a public tree, you have greater opportunities for collaboration and connection. One of the things that we've discovered is people view public trees at a rate exponentially greater than they view private trees, or than they contact private tree owners. It's that whole idea of the path of least resistance, that if there's a public tree out there, I'm more likely, as a user, and it even increases with new users, more likely to contact that person, copy information out of their tree, right, than I am a private tree. Now, when somebody copies information out of my tree, even if they don't contact me, I can see that in my Member Connect information, and I can then contact them. Hey, I noticed that you copied my great-great-grandfather out of my tree. I don't recognize your username. How are we related, right? And very often I'll get very favorable responses back from that, and then it opens up this great opportunity to collaborate and to connect with cousins and to get more information than I had before and to share information. Which brings me to my next point. One of the reasons to have a public tree is to share all your hard work. I know a lot of people spend a lot of time and money building your tree. And there seems to be this, among some people there's a sentiment, well, I'm not going to share that. I did all that hard work. That's my work. And that's true. But what are you doing it for? Right? Why are you doing all this hard work? If it's just for your own personal enjoyment, then that's fine. There's nothing that says you have to share it. But I would hope that you were putting in all that time and money and effort, that you would want to share it, that you would want to make sure that it's available. Now, some people are choose to share it with just their children or just their grandchildren, and that's fine. Some people are a part of that, well, I'll publish it when it's all done crowd. And if you've watched previous presentations, you know how I feel about that. It's never all done. And sometimes you put it off until it's too late. And so I just want to encourage you that if you're considering making your tree public as a way to share your work, that you should. One of the things about public trees is that if they're public until you switch it. And if anything were to happen to you, whether by natural causes or not, if your tree was private, the only way that information that you've spent all these years and all this money putting together, the only way that information would ever see the light of day is if someone had your username and password and knew you had created a tree online. And then they could go in and make that information public. Otherwise, all of that hard work will sit in a private tree forever because you're no longer around to share that information. I know that might sound a little morbid to some of you, but as genealogists, we deal in mortality, and so we recognize that nobody lives forever, and so sharing that work sooner rather than later is usually a better idea. Okay, the third reason why people make their trees public is that it's not just your family, okay? A lot of times, all the time, we identify with these people, we're connected to these people, and I get that. I feel very strongly about my own family, but the reality is they're not just my family, right? My grandparents have 12 grandchildren. My great-grandparents on one branch of my family, I think, have like 98 great-grandchildren. I mean, as you go back, it gets big, right? My third great-grandfather, I've done a descendancy project on him, and we're still not done. Over 8,600 descendants from one third great-grandfather. And so when I start protecting this information or claiming that they're my people, the reality is they're not my people. They're our people in many cases. And so it kind of goes along with sharing, but just changing your view a little bit about whose information that is. The next reason, and this one I feel really strongly about, here's my opinion. One of the reasons that people have given for making their tree private is people are taking my information and they're putting it into their trees, and then they're getting it all confused, right? They're attaching the wrong birth date or the wrong spouse or their whatever, right? But the reality is that if you use that as an excuse to make your tree private, now the only thing left out there for other people that come along to view is the bad information. And so if you publish your tree with the right information, then it combats that bad information, right? As a user, if I come along and I see a conflicting opinion, it forces me to pause and make a choice. It forces me to say, hey, there's conflicting information here. Maybe I need to go figure out for myself which of these pieces of information is accurate. If all the people who have good information are hiding their trees or making them private, then all that perpetuates is the bad information. That is one point about this that I clearly feel really strongly about. So hopefully that makes sense and doesn't offend anyone. Now, there are absolutely valid reasons for having your tree private. And let me just share a few of those with you. One has to do with sensitive family information. So even though information on living people is kept private no matter what, sometimes the information about deceased people still affects some of the living people. And so, for example, if you have a father or a grandfather who was in prison and you've attached those records or those newspaper articles, or if dates clearly show that children were born out of wedlock and in your family that's still not discussed or still not acceptable, then some of those kinds of things might be considered sensitive family information that you want to protect from being out there and in the open. And certainly if people have asked you to keep information about their parents or grandparents private, that's an opportunity for you to respect those wishes and make that information private. So that is a decision that has to be made on a case-by-case basis based on your family and the information that you're uncovering. Another reason why you might want to have a private tree, and this one actually is one of the reasons I have a private tree, is that so you can have a working tree. Right? So I tend to collect information and then work to prove or disprove that information. That's one of the methodologies that I use to do genealogy. And so I keep a private tree that is my working tree, or a piece of a tree that is a working tree. And then once I've proven that particular line or that particular family, then I import that into my family tree maker, merge it with my master tree that is my public tree. That doesn't mean that my master tree doesn't have mistakes in it. That doesn't mean that it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not waiting to have a perfect tree before I make it public. But it does mean that I am taking care with the pieces of the tree that I'm working on to make sure that I have as much accurate information as I can before I merge that into my larger tree and share that with the world. So privacy allows you to play around and to try different things, and sometimes I'll tweak dates just to see what pops up in search results, and all of that I can do in a working tree if I keep it private. And then the third reason for keeping a tree private is it just allows you more control over who sees your tree and what you choose to share. That is certainly a right that every one of you have. It gets when you're working with your family tree, you can choose that. Some of you choose to keep your tree private because it forces people to contact you before they can share information, as opposed to making it public and then having to follow up yourself with the people who are connecting to your tree. So this is kind of the boiled down summary of why people choose to either have a public tree or a private tree. And hopefully that gives you enough information to make an informed decision for yourself. One of the things that I would just caution in closing is to just beware of, how do I word this correctly? One of the things that comes up a lot in discussions about public versus private and gets really heated is about people stealing your work. And just be really careful about using that word. And here's why, and maybe this is just an anecdotal experience, but I received an email several months ago from another user who was livid that I had stolen this entire branch of her tree and all this work that she had spent so many years and so much money on. I mean, she was just really angry that I had this tree and that I had all these documents and that I had just stolen her work and not given her any credit at all. First of all, I had no idea who she was. Second of all, I had not worked on that branch of my tree in quite a while. And third, when I went in to look at what she was talking about, it turns out that I had actually done all of that work myself. Keep in mind the fact that other people have access to the same records that you have access to. And you would think that just because people came to the same conclusions in their tree that you did, that would be a boon. That means you're both looking at the same records and you're coming to the same conclusions about the structure of these families. You'd think that would be a good thing. So just be really careful about accusing people of stealing things when the fact is that we're, again, not just your family. More people than just you are related to your grandparents and great-grandparents and so on. And people are using the same records that you're using. So hopefully we're all coming to the same conclusions and finding those same records. But when we don't, that's the great benefit of these online trees, is that when we get stuck or when we can't find the records or when we're not sure where to go next, we can look at what other people have on their tree and we can say, I wonder how they came to that conclusion. And then we can retrace their steps, look for some of those same records, and make sure that we've got that same documentation that proves those family connections the same way that they did. So hopefully that gives you enough information to make a decision about public versus private trees. If you have a topic you'd like discussed in a Barefoot Genealogist presentation in the future, please email me at ask@ancestry.com. Also check our ancestry.com Facebook page. Click on that events tab. You'll see topics, dates, and times for future live stream presentations. If you're watching this live, as always, I will be on chat in just a few minutes to answer any questions that you might have. If you're watching an archived version of this, please feel free to email or leave a comment on YouTube. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.